I remember the first time I met Kelly. It was one of those connections where you instantly feel like you've known someone your whole life. We clicked right away, became best friends almost overnight. We shared everything: secrets, dreams, fears. She was like the sister I never had. We went everywhere together, did everything together. People would always joke that we were basically the same person, like two halves of one soul. For years, Kelly was my rock. She was there through every breakup, every bad day, every celebration. I knew I could always count on her, and I thought she felt the same way about me. She was my person. We even talked about living together one day and raising our kids side by side. It was a friendship that felt unbreakable, you know? But then, everything changed when I met Jake. He was sweet, kind, and honestly, the kind of guy I'd been waiting for my whole life. And when I started dating him, Kelly seemed so excited for me. At first, she was all supportive, constantly asking about our dates and plans, and it felt like she genuinely wanted to see me happy. But then, things started getting weird. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when it began, but Kelly's support turned into something else, something more intense, more controlling. She would show up unexpectedly when Jake and I were out, acting like it was just a fun coincidence. And the questions, she'd ask so many questions about Jake. What we talked about, where we went, even things that felt deeply personal, like what he thought about her. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was just being protective like a best friend should be, right? But as time went on, her behavior became unsettling. And little did I know, that was just the beginning of something much darker. And then there was that one night. Jake and I had gone out to dinner. It was supposed to be this cute little date night, just the two of us. But halfway through, Kelly showed up, unannounced, saying she was just passing by. She sat right down at our table like she belonged there. And then she started grilling me right in front of Jake, asking these super personal questions like, "Do you think he's the one?" And "What do you two do when you're alone?" It was embarrassing and honestly made Jake feel really uncomfortable. I tried to laugh it off, but deep down, it felt off. Like, why was she so obsessed? That's when I started noticing more strange things happening. One day, I came home and found my stuff moved around. My bedroom, which I always kept neat, looked like someone had rummaged through it. At first, I thought maybe I'd just forgotten where I'd put things, but then it kept happening. My jewelry box would be open, clothes pulled out of drawers, and this part still makes my skin crawl. My diary would be out, as if someone had been reading it. But the worst came a couple of weeks later. Jake had come over for a movie night, and after he left, I was getting ready for bed when I noticed something peeking out from under my bed frame. It was a small wooden box. Now, I don't own anything like that, and it definitely wasn't Jake's. My hands were shaking as I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were strands of hair, my hair, tied together with red thread, and little pieces of paper with strange symbols on them, all surrounded by dried herbs that gave off this terrible, musty smell. Couldn't breathe. My heart was racing. All I could think was, what the hell is this? And how did it get here? I had no clue what it meant, but it looked like witchcraft, some kind of curse or spell or something. And in that moment, I knew it had to be Kelly. The late night visits, the constant questions, and the weird behavior, it all added up. But why? Why would she do something like this to me? And how long had she been doing it? I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. The next day, I called Kelly and told her to come over. My voice was shaking, and I could barely keep it together, but she agreed to meet up, all chipper as if nothing was wrong. When she showed up, I was already waiting at the door, box in hand. "What is this, Kelly?" I demanded, holding the box out in front of her. For a moment, her face went completely blank, like a mask slipping off. And then, this weird smile spread across her face, not like she was embarrassed or caught in a lie, but like she was proud. "I was just trying to protect you," she said so calmly. "You don't understand. Jake's no good for you. I was doing what needed to be done. For us." I felt sick to my stomach. Protect me? From what? I asked her over and over why she would hide something like that in my room, but she kept going on about how she could see the truth about Jake, and how I was blind to it. Then she started muttering these strange words under her breath. I couldn't understand them, but they sounded ancient, like they didn't belong in any normal conversation. It was unsettling, and I could tell she was getting more and more agitated. And then she just snapped. She grabbed the box from my hands and threw it against the wall, shouting, "You don't know what you're doing. You're ruining everything." She pulled out more of those dried herbs from her bag, lighting them right there in my living room, muttering and rocking back and forth as the smoke filled the air. I backed away, terrified. I'd never seen her like that. She kept repeating over and over, "You'll see. You'll see. When he's gone, you'll come back to me." I didn't know what to do. I ran to my room, locked the door, and called Jake. He told me to call the police, but when I went back out to confront her again, she was gone, just vanished, leaving the box shattered on the floor and the smell of those herbs lingering like some kind of curse. I could still hear her voice echoing in my ears, "You'll see. You'll see." After that night, I cut all ties with Kelly. I blocked her on everything, my phone, social media, even changed my locks. But she was like a shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, lurking. Every time I'd walk down the street or get home late at night, I'd feel eyes on me, like she was just waiting to show up again. But then, a few weeks later, I got a message from an old friend, Erica. She said she'd run into Kelly at some party, and Kelly was going around telling everyone how I'd abandoned her and how I was under some evil spell because of Jake. She was spinning these crazy stories about how I needed to be rescued from my own life. It was disturbing. Erica and I started talking more, and I found out that she had actually been through something similar with a different friend, a girl named Tori, who also fell out with Kelly. When Erica introduced me to Tori, everything just clicked. Tori described how, over time, Kelly had taken over her life, controlling who she hung out with, what she wore, and even her romantic relationships. And when Tori tried to distance herself, Kelly did the same thing. Started acting weird, showing up uninvited, and messing with witchcraft. It felt like finding a missing piece of a very twisted puzzle. And that wasn't the end of it. I learned there was actually a whole group of girls who had been best friends with Kelly, each with a similar story. The pattern was always the same. She'd find someone, get close to them, and then slowly, quietly, dig her claws in, isolating them from everyone else. And when they tried to break away, that's when things got dark. Stories of spells, confrontations, and those strange symbols, like the ones I found in my room. I wasn't alone, but knowing that didn't make me feel safer. It made me realize just how deep her obsession went, and how far she was willing to go to keep control over the people she saw as hers. It was unsettling to hear those stories, but at least I knew I wasn't crazy, and for a while things seemed to quiet down. I focused on my life, my relationship with Jake, and rebuilding my sense of normalcy. I was trying to move on, but there was always this lingering fear, like Kelly would somehow find a way back into my life. Then, one weekend, a group of us, Erica, Tori, some other friends, decided to take a trip to this little cabin out by a lake. A sort of girls-only getaway to clear our minds and just have fun. It was supposed to be peaceful, you know? A chance to leave all that dark stuff behind and just relax. But from the moment we got there, something felt wrong. We kept hearing these weird noises at night, like footsteps crunching in the gravel outside the cabin, and whispers, barely audible, drifting through the trees. At first, we laughed it off, saying it was just our imagination or maybe some animals. But deep down, we all felt it, this creeping sense of being watched. Like the forest itself was hiding something. The last night of our stay, things escalated. We were sitting around a fire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, when Erica noticed something in the trees, the figure, just standing there, at the edge of the light. I felt my heart drop into my stomach as I squinted into the darkness. It was a woman just standing still, not moving. And then, she took a step forward, and the light caught her face. It was Kelly. She was smiling, that same unsettling smile, and she was holding something in her hands. A bundle of twigs, tied together with red thread. We all froze. Nobody knew what to do, and it felt like time just stopped. But then she whispered something. I couldn't make out what it was, and threw the bundle into the fire. The flames flared up, unnaturally bright, and we all screamed, jumping back. By the time we recovered and looked again, Kelly was gone, like she'd never been there. We packed our things that night and left before sunrise. None of us could sleep. I remember driving home, hands gripping the steering wheel, replaying the look on her face over and over in my mind. It wasn't just about me anymore. Kelly had found a way to insert herself back into our lives, like some twisted force of nature. And even now, I never know when or where she'll show up next, or what she's planning to do. But I do know one thing: she's not done with me. Not by a long shot. I guess every friend group has a leader, right? That one person who seems to always have the final say on what you do, where you go, and who's in or out. For us, that was Nathan. I didn't really think much of it at first. He was the fun one, the guy who kept things exciting, planning trips and adventures, and always pushing us to do something new. He had this energy that made everything feel larger than life. But it wasn't until later that I realized Nathan's need for control went way beyond just being the fun guy. It started small, choosing the restaurants, picking the movies, deciding who got to ride in whose car. Little things. But over time, his suggestions became demands. If someone didn't agree with what he wanted to do, he'd get moody or sulk or sometimes lash out. But the weirdest part? We all just went along with it. It was like some unspoken rule. If Nathan wants it, then that's what's happening. And then there was the way he'd play us against each other. He'd casually mention things one of us said about another, stir up drama, then sit back and watch it unfold, like he got some twisted pleasure from seeing the tension between us. And he was good at it. You never really saw it coming. By the time you realized what was happening, you were already knee-deep in some argument that he'd orchestrated. There were times I wanted to call him out, to tell him he was being manipulative and that it wasn't cool. But I didn't. None of us did. I guess we didn't want to be the one to rock the boat, or maybe we were afraid of being cut off. Because with Nathan, that was the ultimate fear, being on the outside of the group. So we all just followed. Even when things started to get way too intense, and the games he played went from fun to something far more sinister, things started getting weird when Nathan's ideas for fun took a darker turn. One night, we were all hanging out at this abandoned warehouse near the edge of town. It was supposed to be just another one of our little adventures. Breaking into a creepy place, telling ghost stories, the usual. But Nathan brought this old Ouija board with him, saying we were going to conjure some spirits. Now, I'd never really been into that kind of stuff, and neither were most of the others, but Nathan insisted. He said we were all being babies, and that we needed to live a little. Reluctantly, we went along with it. We sat in a circle, hands on the planchette, and Nathan started calling out to whatever might be listening. At first, we were all laughing, trying to make light of it, but then the planchette started moving, fast. We all assumed Nathan was pushing it, but the way he looked at us, that intense stare, like he was searching our faces for some kind of reaction, it was unsettling. The room felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on us. Afterward, Nathan acted like nothing had happened, like it was all just a joke, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And he started doing things like that more and more, talking about spirits, curses, and testing us with these weird little dares. Once, he had us break into a graveyard in the middle of the night, daring each of us to leave a coin on a tombstone and say the name of the person buried there 3 times. Some of us didn't want to do it, but Nathan got angry, saying we were ruining the vibe, that we were killing the fun. I remember one time I tried to speak up, to tell him that it was all getting too much, but he just gave me this look, one that sent chills down my spine, and said, if you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't be hanging out with us, and that was all it took to shut me up. Because in Nathan's world, you were either all in or you were out, and being out Well, that felt like being cut off from everyone I cared about. Then came the trip that changed everything. Nathan planned this weekend getaway, glamping, he called it, out in the middle of nowhere. Just us, some tents, a bonfire, and a chance to let loose, as he put it. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I figured maybe this would be a chance to just relax and have fun, like we used to. But from the moment we got there, the whole thing felt off. Nathan took control immediately. He made everyone put their phones in a box so we can disconnect, he said, and hid it somewhere. Seemed harmless enough, but once they were gone, we all felt cut off, isolated. That first night, we were sitting around the fire, and he started this weird bonding game. Each person had to share their biggest fear, and Nathan would pick it apart, digging for details, making jokes that didn't quite land as jokes. He pushed people until they were uncomfortable, or in some cases until they started crying. But he didn't stop. He said he was helping us grow by making us face our demons. The next day, things escalated. Nathan decided we were all going on a nature ritual, as he called it. He led us to this freezing lake, far away from the campsite, and told us we had to strip down to our underwear and jump in. It's about freedom, he said, eyes wild. Liberation. Letting go of your fear. We hesitated. I mean, who wouldn't? It was freezing. We were miles from anywhere, and Nathan's whole demeanor had changed. He wasn't asking, he was demanding. When some of us refused, he got angry, like really angry. I remember him grabbing my arm, hard, and pulling me towards the water, shouting that we were ruining the ritual and that we needed to be a part of the experience. His face was so intense, eyes wide, almost manic. I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. And then one of the others stepped in, shouting at him to back off. There was this standoff, Nathan breathing heavy, glaring, while the rest of us tried to figure out what to do. It was then I realized how far gone he was, how much he craved control over us. This wasn't about fun, or bonding, or facing our fears. This was something darker. And that night, when we got back to the tents, we knew something had to change. We couldn't stay another minute under Nathan's twisted control. That night, none of us could sleep. We all sat around the tent in silence, the fire dying out, listening to every sound around us. The wind in the trees felt like whispers, and every rustle made us jump. It was like the woods themselves were alive, feeding off our fear. And Nathan? He was in his own tent, separate from the rest of us, but we knew he was still awake, pacing around, muttering to himself. It felt like a storm was brewing, and we were stuck in the middle of it. Around midnight, we finally decided we had to get out. It was too late to drive back to town, and we had no idea where our phones were thanks to Nathan's little game. But we agreed we'd pack our things, wait until the early morning light, and make a run for it. Anything to put distance between us and him. But just as we started quietly gathering our stuff, Nathan's tent zipped open, and there he was, standing at the edge of our circle, the flickering embers casting strange shadows on his face. He was holding something in his hand, a long hunting knife, and his eyes were wild, almost glowing in the darkness. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. We froze. No one said a word, but you could feel the panic rising like a wave. Nathan walked closer, slowly, circling around us, dragging the tip of the knife along the ground, making this scraping sound that made my skin crawl. He started talking, ranting about how we were all weak, how we needed to be purged of our fears, how he was the only one who could truly lead us to some kind of twisted enlightenment. One of my friends, David, tried to stand up to him, telling him to put the knife down, that we were leaving. But Nathan just laughed this low, guttural sound that didn't even seem human, and he pointed the knife right at David. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "None of you are leaving until you understand. Until you see." He waved the knife around, pointing it at each of us. His face twisted with this insane smile, like he was daring any of us to make a move. And that's when I knew we had to leave. Right then, right there. I looked at the others, trying to signal with my eyes. "Run." And just like that, David lunged at Nathan, grabbing his arm, and the rest of us bolted. I heard the struggle behind me, the grunts, the sounds of bodies hitting the ground, but I couldn't look back. We just ran, as fast as we could, into the pitch-black woods, stumbling over roots and rocks, branches scratching at our faces. We didn't know where we were going. We just knew we had to get away. We ran through the woods like our lives depended on it, and honestly, they probably did. It felt like the darkness was swallowing us whole. Every step just a blind leap into the unknown. I could hear my friends around me, their heavy breathing, their panicked footsteps, but all I could focus on was the pounding of my own heart, louder and louder with every step. I didn't even know where we were going. I just knew we had to keep moving to put as much distance as possible between us and Nathan. Somehow we found a trail, or what felt like one, and we kept running, stumbling over roots and branches, barely able to see in the pitch-black night. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see Nathan chasing after us with that knife, that crazed look in his eyes. Every snapping twig sounded like him closing in, every gust of wind like his breath on our necks. It felt like we were running for hours, but it was probably only minutes. Finally, we reached this small clearing, and we all just collapsed trying to catch our breath, shaking with fear and adrenaline. David, who had fought Nathan back at the campsite, was bleeding from a cut on his arm, but he just kept saying, "We have to go back. We need to get to the road. We need to find help." We huddled together, trying to figure out where we were and what to do next. And that's when we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, coming from the direction we just fled. Felt like time stopped. No one moved. No one even breathed. We just listened to that steady crunch, crunch, crunch of someone approaching. And then, Nathan's voice, cutting through the darkness, calm and cold. "You can't hide. You think you can run from me? This isn't over. Not until I say it is." We scrambled to our feet and took off again, hearts racing, tears streaming down some of our faces as we ran blindly through the forest. And then, out of nowhere, we saw headlights. A car. Somehow, we'd made it back to the main road, and there was this lone truck passing by. We threw ourselves into the road, waving our arms, shouting for help. The truck screeched to a stop, and the driver, some older guy who probably had no idea what to make of us, let us climb in, all of us talking over each other, trying to explain what had happened. When the police came, we told them everything. But when they went back to the campsite, Nathan was gone, and so was any sign of that knife or anything that could prove what he'd done. They found our phones, dumped in a ditch nearby, but that was it. It was like Nathan had vanished into thin air. To this day, I don't know where he went or what happened to him. And maybe that's what scares me the most, knowing he's still out there, somewhere, waiting. Because one thing I'm sure of, Nathan isn't the type to just let things go. And I can't shake the feeling that one day, I'll turn around, and he'll be right there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to make me understand. Whatever sick lesson he wanted to teach us that night. I thought marrying Ryan was the start of my perfect life. We had a beautiful wedding, an amazing honeymoon, and I was so excited to begin this new chapter with him. Everything felt like it was finally falling into place. Well, until I got to know his mom, Martha. At first, she seemed sweet, a little old-fashioned, but genuinely interested in my life and the future Ryan and I were building together. She'd always make sure we were invited to family dinners, call just to check in, and bring over little gifts for our home. Felt normal, but looking back, I should have seen the signs. The way she would always ask questions that seemed harmless at first, but were really just ways to dig into my life. She'd say things like, "So, when are you two going to give me grandbabies?" Or, "Have you thought about quitting your job to focus on being a wife?" And whenever I'd laugh it off or try to change the subject, she'd get this look on her face, this tight, forced smile, like she didn't like my answers but was too polite to say so. The real red flags started waving once Ryan and I settled into our new home. Martha was constantly there, showing up without warning. At first, I told myself it was nice, I mean, who wouldn't want their family to be close? But then it became intrusive. She'd show up early in the morning, while I was still in my pajamas, coffee in hand, saying she was just in the neighborhood, or she'd come by late at night just to see how things were going. It was like she didn't understand the concept of boundaries, like she felt entitled to be a part of every single moment of our lives. And then she started bringing things over: baby clothes, high chairs, even a crib, all without asking. I'd tell her we weren't planning on kids anytime soon, and she'd just brush me off, saying, "Oh, you'll change your mind." And that's when I realized Martha had her own plan for my life, one where I wasn't just Ryan's wife, but the mother of her grandkids, the perfect homemaker she thought I should be. It didn't matter what I wanted in Martha's world. There was only one way to be a wife, and she was going to make sure I followed that path, whether I liked it or not. It was like she was on a mission to mold me into her idea of a perfect wife. Every time she came over, she'd make comments about how the house was decorated, how I cooked, how I dressed. "Oh, sweetie, real wives cook from scratch," she'd say with a little laugh if she saw me use anything pre-made. Or, "You really should wear more dresses. It's what Ryan likes," she'd add, like she knew him better than I did. Felt like nothing I did was ever right in her eyes. And then there was the baby talk. Constant, relentless baby talk. Martha would give me pamphlets on fertility, helpful books about how to raise a child, even vitamins for pregnancy. It was suffocating. She'd sit me down during those innocent visits and go on and on about how important it was for us to start a family soon, how women were made to be mothers, and how it was the greatest gift I could give to Ryan. Every protest I made about my career, about wanting to wait, about just not being ready, would be met with the same dismissive tone. "You'll change your mind, dear. Trust me." I started to feel like I was losing control of my own life, my own decisions. And the worst part was that Ryan didn't see it. Every time I'd bring up how uncomfortable Martha was making me, he'd brush it off, saying, "That's just how she is. She means well." But the more I tried to create some distance, the harder she pushed. She'd tell Ryan things like, "I think she's upset with me," or "I don't think she's happy," making it seem like I was the one causing a problem, like I was being unreasonable for wanting some space. And then one day, I found out just how far Martha was willing to go. I was going through some mail, bills, flyers, the usual, when I came across a letter addressed to me from the local university. It said they'd received my request to withdraw from my graduate program and were processing it. I hadn't requested anything. I frantically called the school, only to find out that someone had called them on my behalf weeks ago, claiming to be me, and filed the withdrawal. And that's when it all clicked: the constant pressure to be a mom, the disregard for my career. Martha didn't want me to have a life outside of being a wife and mother, and she was willing to sabotage my future to make sure I didn't. I was furious. My hands were shaking as I held that letter, my mind racing with questions. How could she do this? How could she think it was okay to interfere in my life like that? I knew I had to confront her, and fast, before she could do any more damage. The next day, I went straight to her house. I didn't call or text. I just showed up. And when she opened the door, there she was, all smiles, acting like everything was perfectly normal. But I couldn't hold it in anymore. I shoved the letter in her face and demanded an explanation. "Why would you do this, Martha? Why would you mess with my education, my future?" My voice was louder than I intended, shaking with a mix of anger and fear. But all she did was sigh, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Sweetie," she said, with that patronizing tone I'd come to despise, "I was just trying to help you. You need to be focused on what matters: your home, your husband. This school thing, it's just a distraction. And you'll thank me one day when you're rocking your baby to sleep instead of wasting time in some classroom." My stomach twisted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You don't get to decide that for me," I shouted. "This is my life, my choice, not yours." But she just stood there, unflinching, like she'd already made up her mind and nothing I said could change it. That's when her expression changed. The friendly smile dropped, and something colder, more calculating, took its place. "You think you know what's best for Ryan?" she snapped. "You think this little career of yours matters to him? He needs a real wife, a woman who supports him, who knows her place, who understands the importance of family. And that's what I'm trying to make you see. If you can't, then maybe you're not the wife he needs after all." Her words hit me like a slap. It felt like she was threatening me, as if she'd do whatever it took to make sure I either fell in line or got pushed out of Ryan's life entirely. I left her house that day feeling more trapped than ever. I didn't know what to do. It was clear that Martha would stop at nothing to control every aspect of our lives. And now, she wasn't even hiding it anymore. And when I told Ryan, he defended her, said I was overreacting, that his mom would never do something like that on purpose, that she was just trying to help. I felt like I was screaming into a void, with no one willing to listen or believe what was happening. And that's when I realized I was on my own. After that confrontation, things only got worse. Martha's visits became even more frequent, almost like she was trying to tighten her grip on my life. She'd walk into the house, unannounced, and immediately start rearranging things, commenting on how the kitchen should be organized, the right way to fold laundry, and how I should keep fresh flowers on the table to make it more welcoming for Ryan. She was everywhere, like a shadow I couldn't shake, and her constant presence just wore me down. One day, she came over with a suitcase. "I'm staying for the week," she announced with a bright smile, not even asking if it was okay. "I want to help around the house. Give you two some time to focus on each other." I wanted to scream. It felt like she was moving in, taking over my role, asserting herself as the real woman of the house. But Ryan didn't see it that way. He thought it was sweet, that his mom just wanted to be helpful. And when I told him I was uncomfortable, he got defensive, saying, "It's just for a few days. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" Martha's influence over him was undeniable. She'd take every opportunity to whisper things to him, planting little seeds of doubt. I'd hear her say things like, a wife's first priority should be her husband, or, "Ryan, don't you think it's time to start thinking about a family? You don't want to wait too long." She'd say these things just loud enough for me to hear, but low enough to make it seem like I wasn't meant to. It felt like she was trying to drive a wedge between us, and I could see it working. Ryan and I started arguing more, usually about his mom, and every time it ended with him saying I was being unfair or overreacting. Then came the day when she crossed a line I never thought she would. I'd just come home from work, exhausted, hoping to unwind for a bit before dealing with Martha's usual antics. But as soon as I walked through the door, there she was, sitting on the couch with a huge grin on her face. And in her hand was a pregnancy test. "Surprise," she said, holding it out to me. "I went ahead and bought one for you. I think it's time to see if there's a little one on the way." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to force me to take a pregnancy test, right then and there in front of her, like it was some kind of game. My blood ran cold, and I felt this overwhelming wave of anger and fear. "Martha, this is insane," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You have no right to do this. It's none of your business." But she just stared at me, that fake smile still plastered on her face. "Oh, but it is my business," she said softly, almost too sweetly. "Because once you become a mother, you'll understand. You'll realize that a real woman, a real wife, always puts family first." I didn't take the test. I threw it back at her and told her to get out of my house. She stormed out, fuming, but before she left, she gave me this look, a look that chilled me to my core. "You're going to regret this," she said, her voice low and steady. "I promise you that." And then she left, slamming the door behind her. And all I could do was stand there, feeling like I was trapped in a war I never signed up for, with no way out. After that, everything spiraled. Martha didn't come back to the house, at least not physically, but her presence loomed over every corner of our lives. She'd call Ryan constantly, sometimes multiple times a day, and I'd hear him whispering to her behind closed doors. I knew she was filling his head with lies, twisting the narrative to make it seem like I was the problem, like I was trying to tear the family apart. And the distance between us grew until it felt like we were living separate lives under the same roof. One night, after another exhausting argument about his mother, I finally broke down and told him everything, the letter to my school, the pressure she was putting on me, how she had crossed the line with the pregnancy test. But instead of being horrified or angry, Ryan just stared at me. His expression was blank, unreadable, and all he said was, "She's only trying to help. You're the one who keeps fighting her." It was like he couldn't see it or didn't want to see it, and that's when I realized Martha had succeeded. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted. She'd made him doubt me, doubt our marriage, and I didn't know if there was any coming back from that. I tried to push through, but things just got worse. The tension in our home was unbearable. I was walking on eggshells, trying not to set him off, while also feeling like I was drowning in a life that wasn't mine anymore. And then, one day, I came home to find Ryan sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers. "We need to talk," he said, his voice quiet. My heart sank as I walked over, and that's when I saw what they were: divorce papers. I could hardly breathe. "Ryan, what is this?" My voice was barely a whisper, and he wouldn't look at me. He just kept staring at the papers, his hands shaking slightly. "It's for the best," he said. "Mom thinks—" I cut him off. "Mom thinks? Ryan, this is our marriage, our life. How can you let her do this to us?" But it was like talking to a wall. He just kept saying how maybe we weren't right for each other, how maybe it was a mistake, and how his mom was only trying to guide him to the right decision. In that moment, I felt like I was losing everything: my husband, my future, my sanity, and all because of Martha. I wanted to scream, to rip up those papers, to force him to see how she'd poisoned everything between us. But I knew it was useless. Martha had won. She had twisted and manipulated until there was nothing left to fight for. The last time I saw her was the day I moved out. She showed up as I was loading the last of my things into my car, that familiar, smug smile plastered on her face. "I told you," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "A real wife knows how to hold on to her husband. Maybe someday you'll understand what it means to be part of a family." I didn't respond. I didn't have any words left. I just got in the car, turned the key, and drove away, feeling the weight of it all crushing me. And to this day, I still hear her words echoing in my head. That cold, condescending tone, like she just finished a game she knew she'd win all along. And I can't help but wonder if I'll ever really be free from Martha's grip, or if she's always going to be the ghost haunting my life, no matter how far I run.